I'm Caroline, welcome to my channel. I'm going to read another story, a short story, from this book, ENID BLYTON, The Secret of Skytop Hill, and Other Stories. And I hope you enjoy. This one is called It Happened One Afternoon. Mike went whistling into his father's study to borrow a map. He and his friend Joe were going on a weekend bicycle tour, and Mike wanted to work out the best way to go. Mike felt happy. It was a wonderful day and looked like being a wonderful weekend. He and Joe were to go off that evening, after Joe finished at the office where he had just started work. It was half term. His bicycle was cleaned, ready for the weekend. His mother had already packed him up a bag of food. His father had given him £20 to spend on himself and Joe over the weekend. Everything was fine. He found the map and slipped it into his pocket. Then he caught sight of a new golf club that his father had bought himself. It stood by the table, neat and shining. "Ha, Dad's got a new club," said Mike, and he picked it up. "I bet he could hit a golf ball as far as he can. Whee!" He swung it up behind him and brought it down, crash. Mike turned in fright. He had smashed a lamp and a very, very valuable vase. There they lay on the floor in hundreds of pieces. Mike did the first thing he thought of. He shot out of the room, down the passage, to the garden door, and out to the shed. He hid there trembling. Dad would be furious if he thought I'd done that, he thought. So would Mum. They wouldn't let me go away for a weekend with Joe. I wouldn't be surprised if Dad stopped my pocket money. He stayed there for a long while. He could hear excited voices and knew that the breakages had been discovered. He wondered what to do. He didn't think of owning up and facing up to his punishment. Let them think it was the cat. Tabs was always breaking something. He stayed in the shed till tea time. He knew his mother would have gone out by then to see his grandmother. Dad didn't seem to be about either. Maybe he had gone for a walk. He wouldn't bother about tea. He would just scribble a note to say he was sorry they were out when he set off for his weekend. I don't want to face them so soon after the things got broken, he thought. I'll just let them think I couldn't say goodbye because they weren't here when I left. And by Monday perhaps they'll have forgotten all about the accident and won't ask any awkward questions. He scribbled his note, crept out and snooped around to see where everyone was. No sign of Mum and no sign of Dad either, he thought. That's good. I'll leave the note on Mum's chair and she'll see it when she comes back. He left the note, jumped on his bicycle and rode off down the path and into the lane to go to Joe's. His rucksack was on his back with the things in it he would need. It would be fun. He rode in at the gate at the bottom of Joe's garden. He gave the whistle that he and Joe used, but Joe didn't seem to be there. Blow, there's his bike already. Where on earth is Joe? He heard a movement behind the little summer house nearby, and then a scared and anxious face looked round the corner at him. It was Joe's sister, 12-year-old Jane. Jane, what's the matter? Asked Mike at once. You're crying. What's happened? Is somebody ill? No, said Jane with a gulp. Oh, Mike, it's awful. What's awful? Said Mike, going round the summer house, feeling very worried. He was fond of Jane. Have you gone and got yourself into trouble, Jane? What have you done? Lost your homework again? No, Mike, nothing like that. It's poor Joe, said Jane, and began to cry again. What's happened to him? Asked Mike impatiently. He ought to be here, ready to start out with me. Don't say something's happened to stop him. He's not coming, said Jane, almost in a whisper. He's in awful trouble. He's lost his job at Mr. Frost's office. Dad's furious with him and he might have to go to the police station. Gosh, but what's he done? Asked Mike. Do tell me, Jane. This is awful. I don't know exactly what he's done, nor where it all happened, said Jane. They wouldn't let me stay in the room. All I know is that Joe was sent out to deliver some important papers from the office this afternoon, and they say he went to deliver them, climbed in at the window because he saw a gold watch there, and stole it. Mike listened, absolutely amazed. Joe? Why, Joe was as honest as the day. It can't be true, he said at last. It's a wicked thing to say about Joe. Yes, I know, said Jane, wiping away her tears. But he was found standing in the room and the watch was gone. They think he must have thrown it out of the window as soon as he heard someone coming. That's what they say. But they must be mad, said Mike. Joe couldn't do a thing like that. He simply couldn't. He must have been in the room for some quite good reason. I know Joe. Joe said he heard a peculiar noise and jumped in to see what it was, said Jane. They didn't believe him, of course. Look here, said Mike, feeling very fierce all of a sudden. I'm going to find out where this place is that Joe's supposed to have stolen the watch from. I'm going to go and see these horrible people there. I'm going to tell them that Joe's my friend and couldn't do a mean thing to save his life. Okay, Jane? Oh, Mike, said Jane, looking at him with the greatest admiration. Would you really be brave enough to do all that? You would be a good friend to Joe. He's my best friend and I won't let anyone treat him like that or say things like that about him, said Mike. What's more, when I've seen these people and told them what I think of them, I shall go and see your father and mother and tell them they ought to know better than to think Joe would ever do such a thing as steal a gold watch and tell lies about it. He got up and Jane got up too, drying her eyes. Perhaps they'll let you and Joe go off for the weekend after all, she said. Oh, Mike, I do think you're so wonderful. Where's Joe? Said Mike. Come on, let's find him. Joe was in his room, feeling very miserable. Mike went up to him and slapped him on the back. Cheer up, I'll go and face these people who say things like that about you. Tell me all about it. Haven't you heard all about it? Asked Joe, looking astonished. Well, only what Jane's told me, said Mike. Joe went on, looking astonished, and didn't say a word. Do tell me what happened, said Mike. I want to know, so that I might can march straight off to these people and tell them what I think of them. Joe looked at Mike doubtfully. Well, it seems odd that you haven't heard all about it yet, he said. I'll tell you exactly what happened. I was told to take some important papers to a client this afternoon, so off I went. Well, as I was walking up the front door, I passed a window, and I suddenly heard a most terrific crash. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I looked in at the open window and saw a frightful mess on the floor. "What was it?" asked Mike. "I don't really know," said Joe. "Anyway, I stood there wondering what had caused all the noise and mess, and thought I'd better investigate. So I jumped in at the window, but I hadn't been there for more than a moment before in came the owners and shouted at me to know what I was doing there, and what had I smashed." "Go on," said Mike. "What horrible people." "I was just explaining that I jumped in merely to see what was happening when somebody called out that a gold watch was missing. It had been left on the table and it wasn't there, so they thought I'd taken it. Got in at the window, you see, knocked over a heap of things, and then got frightened and chucked the watch away." "I call this all absolute rubbish," Mike said fiercely. "If they knew you, they'd never say things like that about you, Joe." "Actually, they did know me," said Joe, "but it didn't make any difference. They rang up Mr. Frost and told him what they thought I'd done, and when I got back to the office he was very angry at my behaviour and sacked me, gave me my money and sent me off straight away. My father's furious." "I'm going to see these awful people," said Mike. "Who are they? Tell me their name and address, Joe." Joe didn't say anything. He went very red and looked at the floor. "Go on, Joe, tell me quickly," said Mike. "Mike," said Joe in a low voice, It was your house and your family. You see, I thought I knew you well enough to leap in at the window to see if anything was going wrong. I didn't realise they think I'd smashed those things and taken the watch." Mike sat down suddenly. He stared at Joe. A horrid, sick feeling came over him, and thoughts raced through his mind. He knew at once what had happened. Joe had just been passing his house when he, Mike, had smashed the vase and the lamp with his father's golf club. Joe had leapt in to see what the noise was, and had found nobody there, because Mike had run straight out of the room and hidden. The gold watch, yes, it had been there all right, but probably Mike had hit that too, and quite likely it was in some dark corner of the room, smashed to bits. He sat staring at Joe, feeling wicked and very miserable. Joe had been punished for something he, Mike, had done and had run away from. Joe had lost his job. Joe was in disgrace. Their weekend was ruined. What was to be done? "You see, you won't go and face those people now," said Joe miserably. "They're your own parents. They wouldn't believe even you." Mike stood up very pale. "They will believe me," he said, "and you'll get your job back, and your father would be very sorry he was angry with you. You'll see. But we shan't go off for our weekend. And shall I tell you why? It's because you'll never want to see me again after today." He went off, leaving Jane and Joe very surprised and puzzled. He knew what he had to do. He had to do the thing he had run away from that afternoon. He had to go and own up and take his punishment. He went straight home and found his father. "Dad," he said, "ring up Mr. Frost and tell him to take Joe back at once. I'm the one to blame." "Now what exactly do you mean, Mike?" said his father, astonished. Mike told him. "I came in here and saw your new golf club. I swung it and smashed the lamp and the vase. and I was a coward and ran off to hide in the shed. I hoped Mum would think it was the cat who had broken the things. I didn't know Joe was going to be blamed. His father listened in silence, his face very grave. What about the gold watch? He said. That's missing, as you know. It's probably lying in the grate or under the bookcase smashed, said Mike. I may have hit that too and sent it flying. I'll look, Dad. He looked, and sure enough the watch was under the bookcase, badly damaged. He laid it in front of his father in silence. Punish me twice, said Mike. Once for doing all this, and once for making the blame fall on someone else. I know I'm a coward and you're ashamed of me. I'm ashamed of myself. I've lost your good opinion, and I shall have lost Mum's trust. And I've certainly lost Joe's friendship. I'm a worm. Yes, I rather think you are, said his father. The only good thing in the whole affair is that you owned up when you saw that Joe was being punished. I'm very disappointed in you. It would take you a long while to get back my trust and make me proud of you, and your mother will think the same. Now go and tell your mother I need to speak to her. Mike was in for a very, very bad time indeed. His father would hardly talk to him. His mother looked as if she was going to burst into tears each time she looked at him. Mr. Frost turned the other way when he met him. But would you believe it? Joe didn't turn against him. He was just the same as usual, friendly, kind, and generous. Idiot, he said when Mike thanked him for being so decent. Aren't I your friend? You're in trouble and you want help. All right, that's what a friend is for. Come on, we'll face this together, and when everyone sees us about as usual, they'll soon forget what happened. You were a coward, but you were jolly brave too, to go and own up just for me. Things will work out all right, of course, but what a good thing for Mike that he had a friend like Joe. And that's the end of this short story. Thank you for listening. Bye.